Hello geographers, and welcome to this next case study from the Unit 2 paper. This is part of the topic Unit 2C, Resource Management. Now, in resource management, it will either ask you in the 6-mark question about sustainable scheme or a large scale scheme, and they're the opposites of each other. Something that's large scale is generally not sustainable. And our large scale scheme is China's water transfer scheme. Now, the background to the situation is the north of China is densely populated, and it's much drier than the south of the country. So they've got rivers and things up there, but they don't have enough water for the amount of population they've got. So they end up with a water deficit. Whereas the south of the country has slightly less, it's not sparsely populated, but it's not quite as densely populated as the north. And the south has more rain. So it's got more rain and less population. So it's got a water surplus. So what have they done about it? They've done this. They've done China's water transfer scheme. They move 40 billion cubic metres of water from the south of the country to the north of the country. Now, they do this by a series of pipes and canals that move the water along. The majority of the water is moved along man-made canals, which are big sort of concrete canals that sort of span the length of the country from south to north to get the water to places like Beijing. So that's the solution to it. Now, you can imagine that if something's moving 45 billion cubic metres of water, that it's going to cost a lot of money to do this. And if it's using a lot of concrete to make the canals to move the water and pumping stations, there's a lot of CO2 going to be emitted from the concrete and from the energy that's needed to pump the water. So what we're going to have a look at are the positive impacts of this. What's happened is that more crops have grown in the north. And obviously those crops allow more people in the north better access to food. Factories have benefited. Okay, so factories, we know that China make a lot of products that are sold all around the world. So the more water that's available, the better facilities the factories have got access to. Basically the population of the north of the country, or 53 million people in the north of the country have benefited from this. Okay, just basically people have better access to water. Okay, so there are all the positives with it. Now there are negatives as well. First of all, we get a lot of evaporation. A lot of the water, as it's moving slowly along those rivers, in warm weather gets evaporated, so water is lost through evaporation. 300,000 people who lived on the route of the canals have been forced to move. We've got CO2 from the concrete that's been used to build the canals. So it's feeding into climate change, and it's very expensive. Okay, £62 billion, a very, very expensive project. Now, obviously, it's in China, and in China, schemes like this are, what they do. They do huge, big industrial schemes to benefit their populations, and money will be thrown at a scheme like this to make sure it works, make sure it happens. So this is your large-scale scheme. This is the opposite of your sustainable scheme, which was your sand dams in Kenya. Look carefully at the wording of the question. It will be a 6-marker, and it will ask you with reference to a large-scale scheme, then you go for China. Okay, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.